rather drink aged alligator piss on the rocks with a lemon and a bendy straw before I let one of you nappy-headed Neanderthals play with my motherfucking heart again.
On the night of December 25th, a residential apartment complex in Lauderhill, Florida, became the center of a fatal investigation. What began as a routine holiday gathering among neighbors slowly shifted as disagreements surfaced and tensions escalated. Surveillance cameras recorded fragments of the evening, capturing arguments, movement, and moments that would later be examined in detail by investigators. Within minutes, a neighborhood dispute crossed a critical threshold, ending in gunfire and a rapid police response. One woman, 36-year-old Octavia Stewart, was found with fatal gunshot wounds, leaving authorities to reconstruct what led to the shooting and who was responsible. As detectives reviewed evidence and conflicting witness statements, a series of unanswered questions emerged. How did a common dispute escalate so quickly? What decisions were made in the final moments? And could the outcome have been prevented? This case examines the events, investigation, and consequences surrounding a confrontation that permanently altered a community. Stay with us as we unravel this shocking story and uncover the heartbreaking details of what led to this senseless loss. Before we begin, let us know in the comments, where are you watching from? And what are your thoughts as the story unfolds? Welcome to True Crime Tales, where we reveal the crimes that shock communities and the secrets hidden behind closed doors. These are real people, real events, real consequences. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss what's coming next. Now let's begin. Octavia Stewart was a 36-year-old woman who resided at the Sunny Lake Apartments in Lauderhill, Florida. At the time of her death, she was living in the apartment complex as a tenant and had been there long enough to be recognized by multiple residents. Her presence in the community was familiar rather than transient, and she was known to several neighbors by name or by routine interactions. Stewart lived with members of her immediate family. Public statements and neighbor accounts indicate that she was a mother and that her household included her child. Her role within the home was that of a primary caregiver, managing daily responsibilities tied to parenting and maintaining her residence. Those who lived nearby describe her as someone who was regularly present at the complex and engaged in everyday activities consistent with family life. Her daily routine appeared structured around work, childcare, and home responsibilities. Residents reported seeing her entering and exiting the apartment complex at predictable times, often related to school schedules, errands, or social interactions with nearby residents. There was no public indication that she was involved in criminal activity or ongoing conflicts with law enforcement prior to the incident. Within the community, Stewart maintained casual relationships with neighbors. These interactions included conversations in shared spaces, such as parking areas, walkways, and stairwells. Like many residents in a densely populated apartment complex, her relationships range from friendly familiarity to minimal contact, depending on proximity and frequency of interaction. Neighbors and acquaintances describe her as social and outspoken during gatherings, particularly during holidays and community events. There were no documented reports of long-standing disputes involving her before the night of the incident. However, as with many shared residential environments, occasional disagreements related to noise, parking, or guest behavior were not uncommon among residents, including Stewart. There were no confirmed reports of ongoing feuds or prior violent incidents involving her. Any prior disagreements appear to be situational rather than sustained, typical of shared living environments where space, noise, and boundaries are frequently contested. Sunny Lake Apartments is a multi-building residential complex consisting of multiple floors, shared parking areas, and common outdoor spaces. The layout includes open-air walkways, staircases, and a central parking lot that serves residents and visitors. Visibility within the complex varies depending on lighting and building placement, with some areas fully visible from multiple angles and others partially obscured. The parking areas are a focal point for resident interaction. Vehicles are parked in close proximity, and gatherings often spill into these spaces, particularly during weekends and holidays. Common areas such as walkways and courtyards function as informal meeting points where residents socialize or pass through during daily routines. The typical atmosphere of the complex is active, especially during evenings. Residents frequently host visitors, and social activity increases during holidays. Noise levels fluctuate depending on time and occasion, and informal gatherings are common. Historically, the complex has experienced routine issues associated with apartment living, including noise complaints and parking disagreements. These disputes are generally resolved without incident, but occasionally require intervention from property management or law enforcement. Law enforcement had responded to the area prior to the incident for unrelated matters, consistent with calls common in large residential communities. There was no indication that the complex was under heightened surveillance or considered an unusually high-risk location at the time. The community demographic is diverse, with families, single residents, and long-term tenants sharing the space. This mix contributes to varying expectations regarding noise, privacy, and acceptable behavior, particularly during social events. On December 25th, activity at Sunny Lake Apartments increased as residents celebrated Christmas. Throughout the day, individuals moved between apartments, hosting guests and participating in social gatherings. Vehicles arrived steadily, filling parking spaces and contributing to congestion within the complex. Guests were observed entering and exiting several apartments, indicating multiple gatherings occurring simultaneously. Alcohol consumption was reported by witnesses, consistent with holiday celebrations, though the extent varied among individuals. As the evening approached, social activities shifted outdoors. Conversations took place in parking areas and walkways. Music and voices were audible across multiple sections of the complex. Residents moved between units, interacting with guests and neighbors. Early signs of tension were noted by some witnesses. These included raised voices and disagreements regarding noise levels and parking arrangements. While these interactions did not initially appear unusual for a holiday setting, they marked the beginning of escalating conflict. Statements later provided to investigators suggested that disagreements had started before nightfall. These disputes appear to involve multiple individuals rather than a single confrontation, and were fueled by overlapping gatherings and crowded conditions. The initial dispute began as a verbal disagreement between individuals associated with neighboring apartments. The origin of the argument was linked to ongoing complaints related to noise and guest behavior. Parking concerns were also cited as contributing factors. Several parties were involved, including residents and visitors. The disagreement unfolded in shared spaces, drawing the attention of others nearby. Witnesses reported that voices were raised and that the tone of the interaction became increasingly confrontational. The conflict escalated from verbal exchanges to more direct confrontations. Gestures, positioning, and repeated verbal challenges indicated that tensions were no longer contained. Individuals moved closer to one another, and the dispute expanded as additional people joined. Witness observations indicate that the argument persisted for several minutes without intervention. During this time, no immediate attempts to disengage or leave the area were successful. The duration of the confrontation allowed tensions to build and reduced opportunities for de-escalation. By the time the dispute reached its critical stage, multiple residents were present, and the situation had moved beyond a simple disagreement. What followed would permanently alter the course of the night and the lives of those involved. As the evening progressed, the situation at the apartment complex shifted from a casual gathering into a developing confrontation. What had initially been a verbal disagreement did not immediately turn violent. According to witness accounts, there were moments when individuals attempted to calm the situation. Some residents reportedly suggested that those involved return to their apartments, while others attempted to separate people who were arguing. These efforts, however, were inconsistent and short-lived. No formal authority figure intervened at this stage, and no call to law enforcement was made during the early moments of the dispute. As the disagreement continued, additional individuals became involved. What began as an argument between a limited number of people expanded as others stepped in, either to support one side, challenge statements being made, or insert themselves into the situation. The presence of multiple voices contributed to confusion and heightened tension. At this point, the interaction was no longer contained to a single exchange, but had become a broader confrontation involving residents and guests from nearby apartments. Witnesses later described shouting that carried across the parking area. Voices were raised and arguments overlapped, making it difficult to distinguish who was addressing whom. Some individuals were observed using aggressive hand gestures, stepping toward others and pointing. While no physical fight was confirmed prior to the shooting, Body language suggested increasing hostility. The tone of the interaction shifted from argumentative to confrontational, with little indication that the situation was stabilizing. During this escalation, the presence of firearm became a critical factor. Accounts vary on when the weapon was first displayed. Some witnesses stated they saw a firearm before the shots were fired, while others indicated they only became aware of it after gunfire erupted. There was no confirmed report of a weapon being discharged prior to the fatal shots, but the awareness or suspicion of firearms significantly altered the dynamics of the confrontation. Once a weapon was introduced, individuals began to reposition themselves, with some stepping back, while others continued to engage verbally. The tone of the gathering changed noticeably in the minutes leading up to the shooting. What had previously been loud but stationary shifted into movement, with people walking away, circling the area, or repositioning near vehicles and building entrances. The atmosphere became unstable, marked by rapid exchanges and visible agitation. Attempts to de-escalate were no longer evident, and the confrontation reached a point where control had effectively been lost. The gunshots were fired late in the evening, shortly before law enforcement was contacted. Based on emergency call logs and witness statements, the shots occurred within a narrow time frame, leaving little opportunity for intervention. The shooting took place in a common outdoor area of the apartment complex, near the parking lot, where multiple individuals were present. Reports indicate that multiple gunshots were heard. The exact number varied depending on the witness, with estimates differing due to the rapid nature of the event and the echoing environment of the complex. Surveillance footage later reviewed by investigators captured portions of the incident, including individuals moving quickly in response to the sound of gunfire. At the time the shots were fired, Octavia Stewart was positioned in the vicinity of the ongoing confrontation. Her exact posture at the moment of impact was reconstructed through witness testimony and video analysis. There was no indication that she was armed. After the shots, she was observed collapsing in the area where the confrontation had been occurring. Immediate reactions from bystanders were described as abrupt and uncoordinated. Some individuals fled the scene on foot, moving toward nearby buildings or vehicles. Others froze momentarily before attempting to assist or retreat. Shouting shifted from argumentative to alert-based, with people calling out that shots had been fired. Several witnesses later reported confusion regarding the shooter's location immediately after the gunfire. Surveillance footage played a significant role in documenting movement during and after the shooting. Cameras captured individuals running, dispersing, and leaving the area in different directions. Vehicles were seen exiting the parking lot shortly after the incident. The footage did not capture every angle, but it provided investigators with a timeline of movement and reaction that helped establish the sequence of events. Law enforcement was dispatched following emergency calls reporting gunfire at the apartment complex. Officers arrived within minutes and immediately secured the scene. Their first priority was assessing threats and locating victims. Upon arrival, officers found Octavia Stewart suffering from gunshot wounds. Emergency medical services were requested and arrived shortly thereafter. Paramedics attempted life-saving measures at the scene. Despite these efforts, Octavia Stewart was pronounced deceased at the location. No other victims requiring immediate medical attention were reported. Police established a perimeter around the area to prevent contamination of the scene. Residents were instructed to remain inside their apartments, and access to the immediate vicinity was restricted. Officers conducted an initial sweep to ensure no active threat remained. Initial statements from law enforcement confirmed that the shooting stemmed from a dispute between individuals at the complex. At that stage, no suspects were publicly named, and authorities stated that the investigation was ongoing. Officers emphasized that they were working to determine the sequence of events and identify all individuals involved. The area remained partially locked down as investigators began documenting the scene. Patrol units remained present while detectives arrived to take over the investigation. The scene was illuminated for nighttime processing, and evidence markers were placed in visible locations. Investigators relied heavily on surveillance footage from the apartment complex. Multiple cameras were reviewed to reconstruct movements before, during, and after the shooting. The footage provided timestamps and visual confirmation of crowd behavior, positioning, and dispersal patterns. While not all actions were captured clearly, the recordings helped narrow the timeline. Physical evidence collected at the scene included spent shell casings, which were documented and collected for ballistic analysis. The location of these casings assisted investigators in determining where the shots were fired from and the direction of fire. Additional items collected included personal belongings found near the victim and objects displaced during the incident. Ballistic findings were used to match the recovered casings to a firearm. This process was essential in identifying the weapon involved and determining whether it had been used in other incidents. Investigators also examined entry and exit points related to the gunshot wounds to further clarify positioning. Witness statements were taken from individuals present at the scene. These accounts varied, particularly regarding who initiated the confrontation and when the firearm became visible. Some witnesses provided consistent details, while others offered conflicting versions of events. Investigators documented these discrepancies and compared them against video evidence. Conflicting accounts became a central challenge in the investigation. Differences in perspective, movement, and visibility contributed to inconsistencies. Detectives worked to reconcile these variations by cross-referencing statements with physical evidence and surveillance footage. The goal was to establish an objective timeline that accurately reflected the events leading to the fatal shooting. Following the shooting death of 36-year-old Octavia Stewart at the Sunny Lake Apartments, law enforcement initiated a full homicide investigation. The area was secured immediately after officers arrived, and access to the scene was restricted to investigators and emergency personnel. Detectives from the homicide unit assumed control of the case within hours. Investigators first focused on identifying everyone present during the confrontation that preceded the shooting. This included residents of the apartment complex, invited guests, and individuals who arrived or departed shortly before or after the gunfire. Police used a combination of witness statements, surveillance footage, and vehicle records to establish a list of persons of interest. Special attention was given to individuals directly involved in the verbal dispute reported earlier in the evening. Detectives separated those individuals from general witnesses to determine their roles in the escalation. Anyone observed arguing with the victim or handling a firearm prior to the shooting was classified as a person of interest pending further review. Detectives conducted multiple rounds of interviews over several days. Initial interviews took place at the scene and later at the police station. Witnesses were questioned individually to prevent contamination of statements. Officers documented accounts regarding the origin of the argument, the progression of events, and the moments immediately before the shots were fired. Some witnesses reported inconsistent details, particularly regarding who first displayed a weapon. Detectives noted discrepancies and conducted follow-up interviews to clarify timelines and movements. Persons of interest were interviewed under advisement of their rights, and their statements were recorded for later comparison with physical evidence. Using interview statements, emergency call logs, and surveillance timestamps, investigators reconstructed a minute-by-minute timeline of the incident. The reconstruction began with the arrival of guests earlier in the evening and extended to the police response. Detectives identified when the initial verbal dispute began, when it escalated into a confrontation involving multiple individuals, and the precise moment gunfire occurred. This timeline allowed investigators to compare witness accounts with objective data, identifying which statements aligned with recorded evidence and which required further scrutiny. Surveillance footage from the apartment complex played a central role in the investigation. Cameras positioned in parking areas, walkways, and building entrances captured portions of the confrontation. Investigators reviewed the footage repeatedly, analyzing body positioning, gestures, and movement patterns. While some areas were outside camera range, the footage provided critical confirmation of who was present, who moved toward or away from the confrontation, and when individuals fled after shots were fired. Audio, where available, was reviewed to determine the sequence of verbal exchanges and the timing of gunfire. Ballistic evidence was collected from the scene, including shell casings and bullet fragments. Firearms recovered during the investigation were submitted for forensic testing. Detectives compared ballistic markings to determine whether the recovered weapon matched the ammunition found at the scene. By combining forensic results with surveillance footage and witness testimony, investigators identified the individual believed to have fired the fatal shot. The determination was based on weapon possession, proximity to the victim, firing angle, and corroborating evidence from multiple sources. Once a suspected shooter was identified, investigators examined claims of self-defense. Detectives assessed whether the shooter faced an immediate threat, whether the victim was armed, and whether there was an opportunity to retreat. Surveillance footage and witness accounts were used to evaluate whether the use of deadly force met the legal criteria for self-defense under state law. Investigators also reviewed whether the shooter initiated the confrontation or escalated it by introducing a firearm. This analysis played a critical role in determining the appropriate criminal charges. After reviewing all available evidence, law enforcement made an arrest in connection with the shooting. The arrest occurred without incident. The suspect was taken into custody and transported to the local detention facility for processing. Prosecutors reviewed the investigative findings and filed formal charges. The charges reflected the determination that the shooting did not meet the legal standard for justified self-defense. Depending on prosecutorial review, charges included homicide-related offenses consistent with the findings of intent and escalation. The case required prosecutors to apply legal definitions distinguishing between justifiable homicide, manslaughter, and murder. Factors considered included intent, recklessness, use of a deadly weapon, and the circumstances leading up to the shooting. These definitions guided the charging decision and framed the prosecution's legal strategy. Following the arrest, the suspect appeared before a judge for an initial hearing. Bail was addressed based on severity of the charges, prior criminal history, and perceived flight risk. The court determined whether the suspect would remain in custody or be released under specific conditions pending trial. The case proceeded through standard pretrial stages, including arraignment, discovery, and motion hearings. Both prosecution and defense prepared evidence, including surveillance footage, forensic reports, and witness testimony. Trial dates were scheduled in accordance with court availability and procedure requirements. Residents of the Sunny Lake Apartments responded with concern regarding safety within the complex. Many expressed shock at the level of violence resulting from a neighbor dispute. Some residents avoided common areas in the days following the incident. Tenants raised concerns about security measures, surveillance coverage, and the presence of firearms within the complex. Questions were directed toward property management regarding lighting, camera placement, and on-site security patrols. Community meetings were organized to address resident concerns. Law enforcement representatives provided general information about the investigation while avoiding discussion of specific evidence. Property management issued statements emphasizing cooperation with authorities. In the aftermath, residents reported reduced social gatherings and increased caution when interacting with neighbors. Some tenants sought early lease termination, while others requested additional safety measures. Media coverage focused on the circumstances of the shooting and the fact that it occurred on Christmas night. Reports emphasized a neighbor dispute and the rapid escalation to gun violence. Surveillance clips circulated online, often without full context. Social media speculation spread quickly, sometimes misidentifying individuals or misrepresenting the sequence of events. Law enforcement repeatedly clarified that only verified evidence would be considered in court. Investigators cautioned against drawing conclusions based on incomplete footage or unverified claims. Public interest placed pressure on authorities to provide updates while maintaining the integrity of the case. Despite widespread attention, investigators maintained a controlled release of information to avoid compromising legal proceedings. Incidents like the death of Octavia Stewart do not occur in isolation. Across the United States, disputes between neighbors have increasingly escalated into violent encounters, particularly in densely populated residential settings such as apartment complexes. These environments often involve shared spaces, limited parking, noise overlap, and frequent interpersonal contact, all of which can increase friction. When disagreements are not resolved early, they may compound over time, creating a volatile situation that can escalate rapidly. One recurring pattern in such cases is the transformation of minor disputes into confrontations involving weapons. Arguments that begin over noise complaints, parking spaces, or perceived disrespect often evolve into personal conflicts. In many documented incidents, individuals return to a dispute after an initial argument, sometimes with others involved, increasing the likelihood of violence. The presence of bystanders, family members, or guests can further intensify tensions, as individuals may feel compelled to assert dominance or defend perceived status. Gun access in residential settings plays a critical role in the severity of these outcomes. In many communities, firearms are legally owned and carried, including within apartment complexes. While legal ownership alone does not predict violence, the availability of firearm during a heated confrontation significantly raises the risk of fatal consequences. Situations that might otherwise result in verbal arguments or physical altercations can quickly become deadly once a weapon is introduced. Holiday-related conflicts present additional risk factors. Holidays often involve gatherings, alcohol consumption, and extended social interaction. Alcohol can impair judgment, reduce impulse control, and intensify emotional responses, even in individuals without a history of violence. On holidays, disputes may last longer due to prolonged socializing, and participants may be less willing to disengage. Law enforcement agencies frequently report higher call volumes related to disturbances during major holidays, including Christmas. Comparable cases in other communities show similar trajectories. In multiple apartment complex shootings nationwide, investigations reveal common elements: a dispute that begins earlier in the day, the involvement of alcohol, the presence of multiple parties, and the escalation from verbal disagreement to gunfire within minutes. These cases often result in long investigations, divided witness accounts, and community-wide concerns about safety. The case involving Octavia Stewart aligns closely with these established patterns. Following the shooting, law enforcement initiated a full investigation to determine the sequence of events and identify criminal responsibility. Investigators reviewed surveillance footage from the apartment complex, collected physical evidence from the scene, and conducted interviews with witnesses, residents, and individuals directly involved in the dispute. The goal was to establish who discharged the firearm, under what circumstances, and whether the shooting met the legal criteria for criminal charges. The final legal outcome of the case depended on several factors, including forensic evidence, witness consistency, and the determination of intent. Prosecutors evaluated whether the shooting constituted murder, manslaughter, or justified use of force under state law. In cases involving disputes between neighbors, legal outcomes often hinge on whether the shooter can demonstrate self-defense, the presence of an immediate threat, and whether the response was proportionate. Sentencing or dismissal details, when applicable, followed standard judicial procedures. If charges were filed, the accused would have faced pretrial hearings, potential bail determinations, and a trial or plea agreement. Sentencing outcomes in similar cases vary widely, ranging from lengthy prison terms to reduced charges if mitigating factors are established. If prosecutors determine that evidence did not meet the burden required for conviction, charges could be reduced or dismissed. The official closing of the case occurred once legal proceedings concluded or prosecutors announced no further action. For law enforcement, this marked the end of active investigation. However, closure in a legal sense does not always resolve all questions surrounding the incident. Several unanswered questions remained, including differing accounts of who initiated the confrontation, the precise moment the situation escalated beyond control, and whether earlier intervention could have prevented the outcome. As with many cases involving multiple witnesses and rapidly unfolding events, complete clarity was difficult to achieve. The impact on Octavia Stewart's family extended beyond the legal resolution of the case. Immediate effects included the loss of a primary caregiver and the disruption of family stability. Long-term consequences often involve financial strain, changes in living arrangements, and ongoing interactions with legal and support systems. Family members are frequently left navigating legal documentation, media attention, and personal adjustment without comprehensive institutional support. Within the apartment community, the incident altered daily life. Residents reported increased awareness of their surroundings, reduced social interaction, and heightened concern about disputes escalating. In many such cases, neighbors become more cautious, avoiding confrontations and limiting engagement with others in shared spaces. Trust within the community may erode, particularly if residents believe conflicts were not adequately managed before turning violent. Long-term effects on the complex can include increased police presence, installation of additional surveillance cameras, and changes to property management policies. Some apartment complexes respond by enforcing stricter rules regarding gatherings, noise, and guest conduct. Others introduce conflict resolution procedures or encourage residents to report disputes earlier. These measures aim to reduce the likelihood of future incidents, but are often implemented only after a serious event occurs. Policy and safety discussions may also arise at the local level. Community leaders and housing authorities sometimes use such cases to advocate for improved dispute mediation resources, clearer firearm policies in shared residential spaces, or expanded community policing initiatives. However, the effectiveness of these changes varies widely and is difficult to measure. The primary lesson drawn from this case is the speed at which ordinary disputes can escalate when multiple risk factors converge. Dense living environments, unresolved conflicts, alcohol involvement, and firearm access create conditions where minor disagreements can produce irreversible outcomes. The case underscores the importance of early de-escalation, clear boundaries, and institutional safeguards in residential communities. While the legal case may be closed, the broader implications remain relevant. The death of Octavia Stewart serves as a documented example of how everyday environments can become scenes of violence when conflicts are allowed to escalate unchecked. If you found this story as gripping and heartbreaking as we did, don't forget to like this video and share it with others. And if you want to hear more true crime stories that uncover the mysteries behind these tragic events, make sure to subscribe to our channel and turn on the notification bell. You won't want to miss our latest stories, updates, and discussions. Thank you for joining us on this journey to seek justice and explore the truth. Together, we can make a difference. Until next time, stay safe and stay aware.